I don't know whether there will be a general debate today on UK recognition of the state of Palestine alongside the state of Israel. It was meant to be held today, Thursday, the 24th of February, but I'm not sure whether the latest developments in Europe on the Russian-Ukrainian front would actually change the agenda of our parliament, of the House of Commons. Welcome to another episode of Intuitive Reactions, number 39. So instead of talking about Israel-Palestine and about the viability of a two-state solution, whether the United Kingdom should recognize Palestine, whether recognizing Palestine is a recognition of the persons involved there or of the state as an idea in self-determination, and there are two different things which could lead to different answers by countries considering recognition. Instead of all that, I'm going to talk about Ukraine and Russia, of a war that we're witnessing in the heart of Europe, pitting President Putin against President Zelensky, pitting one concept against another. But there is more. President Putin, I believe, from his statements, does not consider Ukraine really a viable, sovereign, independent state. He considers it just a territory, an appendage and annex to Russia, and he simply, bluntly refuses to have a pro-Western, supposedly, pseudo-democratic, supposedly, country on its borders. Now, when one talks about Ukraine, what comes in mind? I'm sure that lots of people, except those who are interested in that neck of the woods or who have visited the Ukraine, wouldn't really know much about the country. But for me, the three key cities or landmarks for the Ukraine are: one, Sevastopol, which is the largest city in Crimea and a major port in the Black Sea. It, by the way, was annexed to Russia in 2014. Then there is the capital, Kiev, and then there is Odessa on the western Black Shore. Now, when we are talking about the Ukraine these days, we're talking about the Donbass region, and the two names that keep coming back to us, and there are so many more, by the way, are Donetsk and Luhansk. But what people perhaps haven't fully understood is that that whole area in the southeastern part of the Ukraine, it was not all occupied by Russian separatists allied with Russia against the government in the Ukraine. In fact, 65% of that territory was still Ukrainian until recently, and until the latest military campaign that is being waged by Russia these days as we speak against the Ukraine. So what is going to happen? I have no idea what will happen next. Is the intent of President Putin and Russia to stop in the whole Donbass region, secure that, and then stop there? Is he aiming the whole of the Ukraine and take this territory out of the Western orbit and the NATO orbit, so-called, and append it to Russia with a regime that is sympathetic, that is friendly with Russia and with President Putin's conceptualization of Russia and the world order today? Or is he going beyond the Ukraine? I mean, after all, the capital, Kiev, one of the three landmarks I mentioned to you, is only about 2,000 kilometers away from Brussels. It's only 2 hours flight from London. So are we basically talking about a I don't dare use the word limited incursion or war, but is it going to be limited, at least at this stage, to the Donbas region, or is it going to go beyond that? Is the idea that Putin has, and he believes that he can get away with it, to basically change the whole world order and the stability associated with it? And what will we see as a consequence of this latest campaign? Is it going to be crises in the country for the ordinary citizens of water, of electricity, of liquidity, either in that region itself or further across the whole country? Is it going to be a reminder of 2014 when the conflict peaked and then receded because we forgot about it as a world community quite quickly? What is going to be the role of China? China has very strong commercial ties with the Ukraine and also with Russia. But China also has adopted increasingly more policies that are inimical with Western interests. How is it going to play it out in this conflict? Some statements have already come out about China's understanding of Russia's concerns. But will it go further? Will it mention anything more? Will this be something that will remain in Chinese memory when it comes to that tiny stretch of land called Taiwan? Ask yourself another question as we face this latest campaign. We're talking about sanctions. Are sanctions, economic sanctions, the only weapon in the Western toolbox? Russia has gathered huge amounts of reserves that it could now deploy in order to sustain its military campaign, as well as to sustain its control of the Ukraine, if that is what it is planning to do and where it wants to go. But I think there is more to it than just that. For me, I think what is happening today is tantamount to a wake-up by the West, by the democratic or so-called democratic forces in Europe. The three defense lines that could cause pain to Russia, if that is the intent now as a response to this campaign, first of all, of course, the level of resistance by the Ukrainians themselves. I mean, they've beefed up their military arsenal, their ordinances, etc. Will they be able to deliver? We've seen this before. Just pumping in a military arsenal doesn't mean that the fighting will become more robust. But the other two critical points where people would look at in terms of sanctions are the Nord Stream 2 pipeline that links Russia and gas exports with Germany. The German Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, has, in my opinion, shown a lot of determination by suspending this project with Russia when the first step of incursions took place. How will he continue? How will that impact the economy of Germany and by extension, the economy of Europe? And the other painful sore point is the Russian oligarchs in London, what is commonly known by some people rather than Londongrad, because of the amount of money that is in this country, some alleging that it is sheer money laundering. How will our UK government react to that? Now, the question that I have in mind, which I share with you, because at the end of the day, my YouTubes aren't ready-made answers. They're basically pauses for thought, they're questions, they're ways of thinking together about what is happening or not happening across the world, but more in my case across my neighborhood. And this is a bit of a digression again, but one that is worth it because we are living in critical times. Would it have been possible to avoid this ramping up of violence by understanding Putin and Putin's concerns more? Now, some people say yes. I've heard politicians, American and European politicians, saying we should have appreciated what were the Russian concerns about NATO, about the post-collapse of the USSR. And there are others who've said that is tantamount to appeasement, no more and no less. And I leave with you 3 examples for you to ponder over. Think of Moldova and the breakaway region of Transnistria. Think of Georgia and the separatist regions of South Ossetia and Abkhazia, which incidentally, like the Donbas region in the Ukraine, which is my third case in point, also had large Russian-speaking populations. How do you deal with a world order where you've got 2 very, very difficult and opposing concepts? A tug of war between one side, open for all, states are sovereign, they choose their own destinies, and the other Yalta-esque approach of no, the world is alliances, reminiscent of the Cold War. Or somewhere in the middle are attempts at the Finlandization of the Ukraine, which itself would then ask the question, well, would it stop? Would it stop with the Ukraine, or would it then go on and say, oh, if we're talking about the Finlandization of the Ukraine, we might as well talk about the Finlandization of other countries as well. We are in a critical situation where politicians, responsible politicians, not populist politicians, not the kind of total balderdash that ex-President Trump is spewing out in the United States, saying that if he were a president today, if the elections had not been rigged, he said it on Fox News, then it wouldn't have happened, this, that, and the other. Please, please. Responsible politicians, minus bluster, minus populism, have to deal with these questions. After all, war is not easy, no matter where it happens, whether it's in the Middle East and North Africa, whether it's in Africa itself, the continent, whether it's in Latin America, wherever it is. Whether it's in the Southern Caucasus, I'm Armenian, and we've just been talking, I've been talking over the past year or 2 about what's happening there. War is not easy. Several plays, let me go a little bit literary on you if you don't mind. Several of Shakespeare's plays are, after all, explicitly about war. And he says in one of them, war leads to the dogs of war. That's Mark Antony in Julius Caesar. In other words, it deals to chaos and to destruction. Cry havoc and let slip the dogs of war, in Julius Caesar, says Mark Antony. War is not easy. War is not the way to achieve goals and purposes. So let us think a bit more. Let us think a little bit more coherently, more calmly about why we are where we are. This is what think tanks are all about. This is what people talk about, to analyze situations and what led to actions and reactions. And as we do that, as you do that, I also today, sadly, with a heavy heart, greet my friends and acquaintances in the Ukraine. There is precious little that I, as an ordinary human being, can do, alas. This is, after all, one reality that emerges from this episode. When ordinary men and women, no matter where they are located in the world, come to face with aggression, with military bullying, and with occupation. It's sad, but we've seen it time and again. And after a hiatus, after a peaceful time when the West was boasting that we haven't had a war for many decades, the Secretary General of the UN said it only yesterday about that we now have something happening in our back door as Western Europe. The moral of the story: frozen conflicts hardly ever stay frozen forever. Take care.